How long time do you see your investments?
We look at 5 to 7 years in any investment we make. Since we set up the firm a year ago, we've looked at 140 opportunities. We made one investment. So we're taking our time. We're not in a rush. And as was mentioned earlier, it's a fantastic vintage when you look today at Africa, because you have the double whammy: the oil, the commodity, the security issue. We have a major security issue in Africa, not only Nigeria, in Africa as a whole. No one is talking about. The Boko Haram is not also a Nigerian issue. It's an African issue. What we've seen in Mali is also an African issue. So this issue needs to be resolved and actions need to be taken. So 5 to 7 years, and we're not there, unlike the private equity where we need to exit in 7 years. We have families who are there to invest for the long run. And we're a little bit patient.
Thank you. I must say, well, talking about risk, this is my training, and one of the biggest risks we take in our life is marriage. It's a 50% return. So, you know, or downturn, it depends the way you look at it. Sorry?
She's not around, you can say this.
Right, oh no, I've got 5 women at home, so, you know, 4 daughters and a wife. Sometimes you let go. But no, seriously, you see the Swiss franc with rates that are negative. Frankly, business opportunities, I'm French by passport. I'm resident in this country for 5 generations. If you look at business opportunities, they are close to none on this continent. I mean, in terms of potential returns. We let ourselves down. The politicians have been, I must say, I've been voting for the less worst for the past 30 years. And I think it's the case for most Europeans. In Africa, on the contrary, even though it has been very criticized, there is very strong leadership, and I think that is what's needed today. You cannot do half political, please everybody, it's finished. You cannot. You have too strong opposition, be it in terms political, be it religious. Today, you cannot do half measures. That's over.
So, I suppose looking at emerging nations in Africa, as well as the Middle East, as well as the Far East. Now, of course, when we look at Africa, we're really looking at Nigeria. South Africa is established. Kenya is slowly emerging. But Nigeria is a big economy. And so this is where we specialize. Done a lot of research in the country. And of course, the research is focused on the big towns. Now, that's not a short answer, but thank you.
I have little to add to that. However, just look at some macro fundamentals. Africa is a huge population. It is underpowered in terms of infrastructure, electricity. It's a small consumer compared to the industrialized countries. It is under-industried as well, and it is essentially over-resourced in terms of natural resources. Now, to me, that represents opportunity. Coupled with that, there's only a segment of the investor community that even wants to look at Africa. So that means for those that are, the opportunities are even better. I don't think you can get away from that. We need patience. I think that was mentioned by Albert. Certainly we need patience.
To me, the investment has to be bringing your skills back home. Because as far as money and all that's concerned, there is money in the country. There is wealth in the country. I'm doing things in Nigeria today that I never dreamed of in terms of the work that we did when I was in the UK. And I weren't playing when I was in the UK. We did good work and we did good business and we were quite exposed. And yet, the opportunities back home are far more. But they require skills, structuring, people doing, what they're supposed to be doing, bringing the knowledge and the expertise, back to the country.
I will talk about oil and Nigeria. I think that over the last decade, Nigeria has actually diversified its economy. And to a large extent, the doom and gloom presented maybe by Oliver in his opening remarks, I don't actually necessarily agree with. While oil and gas represents something like 80 or 90% of government revenues, it only represents something like 11% of GDP. And the government itself only represents a further 3 or 4%, let's call it 5% of GDP. So it's really 15% of the Nigerian GDP that is directly dependent on oil today. In addition to that, of course, oil represents a large proportion of Nigeria's foreign exchange earnings. And so to the extent that we need to purchase things in foreign exchange, then we're dependent on oil for that. But that is something that can be easily corrected through the exchange rate. And I think that what we've seen both in the last financial crisis and also this time around is that the monetary authorities are much more willing to devalue the currency early and aggressively. And bear in mind that there's an election in sort of about 3 weeks' time. And we're still seeing devaluations in the currency, or we saw the official devaluation last year. And I'm pretty sure there's another one that's going to be coming at least once the election is done. This compensates to a large extent on the balance of payments side.
What I think is a pity is that we have so many excellent Nigerians, well-educated Nigerians, who are living in the diaspora, who are not back home doing work in Nigeria, improving the country. I'd love to see that.
Here's a situation where people have come together to talk about what can benefit Nigeria. And it's a good thing. Not only Nigerians, but foreigners are also speaking. As concerns the Nigerians who are here, it's advisable that even if they want to stay here, they can still contribute to what's happening in Nigeria by joining up with friends, relatives in the country.
I think there are some lessons to be learned for Nigeria from the collapse of oil prices. And one of the key lessons to learn is that in preparing your budget, you should be very mindful of the fact that you cannot plan based on what you cannot control. And we center our budget around the price of crude, even though the benchmark he mentioned is more in the 70s rather than the 120 that Deutsche Bank is talking about. Also, the peculiar nature of our country in terms of government is that because of the federal nature, you've got the center, that's the federal government, you've got the state governments, and you've got the local governments. Albert showed us the slide where you have the center, you have about 36 states, including the Federal Capital Territory, and about 770 local governments, and they're sharing that money 56, 26, was it 52, 26, and then 24% or 22% for the local government. So there's an intense scramble for that resource. So with this collapse in the oil price, there's less to share, But what that does is that it begins to make everybody think about the way they spend the money and how they also generate money. He talked about internal revenue, taxation. Nigeria is notoriously weak in terms of tax collection. So hopefully this will help us. Also, the local content policy of government has been trying to encourage indigenous companies to come in terms of production and in terms of on the oil service side. This collapse is certainly going to affect them because a lot of them have borrowed money to buy some of the assets divested by the oil majors, and they were doing their numbers at 70. Now you're talking mid-40s. certainly that's going to have an impact on them. And then the oil service companies who do projects for the oil majors, they're going to find that the projects are going to be shut down. They're going to be a massive reduction in contracts, and this would ultimately have some impact.
As far as the proceedings are concerned today, we all know that Africa is the last frontier. We've heard that it's full of potential. We know that. But I think it's time for Africans to tell their own story and to actually put action behind telling their own stories. Because we cannot afford for other people to be telling us what we already know about our countries. We should be telling them what we have and show them how to do it.
If you were a financial investor, or either a financial investor or a bank looking to acquire another bank, you're going to want to buy it after it's been cleaned up. And that's exactly what Amcon did. And so it's no surprise that, whether it be private equity, I guess initially with, I think it was African Capital Alliance, a couple of others on Union, and then Bob Diamond, but other banks and the Qataris. I think it's no surprise because it's the biggest market, it's fast growth, young population, wealth creation, and the banking system's just been cleaned up for you. So, I think you then look around the rest of Africa and try and find similar situations, either where they haven't been through some financial crises, and so there isn't that need to clean them up, or where there is that process going on. In terms of how you attract and how you attack the next 10, I mean, the fascinating thing as a Westerner, the fascinating thing about the African banking business is it looks nothing like the Western banking business once you start looking at mobile and the whole agent banking model and everything else. So. I suspect it's a double-edged sword. So if you said to me, what's the fastest way to get another 10 million subscribers, it's probably to have a mobile banking business. Interestingly, it's probably also one of the constraints on the banks, at least how we think about them traditionally, because it's not a traditional banking market. And, I was in Kenya recently and spent some time with Safaricom. And when they tell you that they're putting 1.1 billion a month through their mobile system just doesn't even touch the banks. Yeah. And you've got a third of Kenyan GDP going through the mobile phone system. I mean, it's a remarkable business. And so that is a threat and an opportunity to the banks as well. So I think the African banks have to be as innovative as the Western banks do. But actually, they're ahead of the Western banks because it's already there. So I imagine that's how you would go quickly from 30 to 40, get yourself a decent agent and mobile phone banking business. I think for the rest, for the more traditional and for the Rothschilds and Edmund Rothschild and other people, institutions like that, that is, you're dealing with the very high end, obviously then. That is more a process of education and helping them understand the different and obviously a number of them are very sophisticated already. But I think as the wealth gets created, what you need to do is embark on a process of educating those potential clients about what some of the products and services that they should start thinking about, not necessarily today, but 2 years from now. And that's more about how do you build the margin rather than necessarily how do you build the volume. But you're far more qualified to talk on that than I am.
Well, thank you for the compliment, but we don't stick to just the wealthiest. I'll give you an example. The Baron mentioned this morning, we have this venture capital company called Ametis. They communicate under Ametis, and I complain that they don't mention Rothschild, who's footing the bill since we own 51% of it. But this Ametis Finance raised 530 million to invest in Africa, in mid-cap companies that would have an impact, helping them to get to the next level with an impact on socioeconomic development. So to come back to your comments, we invested in a bank in Ghana that went from number 8 to number 3, and that actually has the number 1 mobile phone business network. And so they demonstrated to us, it's quite amazing. They come to any market, your vendors, they will take their photograph, biometrics, fingerprints. The bank officer would type in their name, and in 15 minutes they have a bank account and they can deposit money and transfer and pay and so forth. So yes, but it's inherent to the nature Africa starts later, but with the best technology. The same thing with the mobile phone business. I mean, everybody in Africa has at least 2 cell phones. It's amazing, sometimes 3. So, voila. But we're not snobs sticking to the wealthy and sophisticated only. We will strive to give most suitable solutions to the clients, and also get into the market where we'll make the most money. I mean, we don't dictate, we adapt to the market we go into.
You need government, you need to remove indiscipline, you need to remove corruption, and everything will fall in place. That is the bane of Nigeria's problem.
What I want to try to do is to combine the best of Nigeria with the best of the outside world. So in Nigeria, we have driven, very intelligent people who are ambitious, and who want to achieve big things. And I think that's great. And we should take that and marry it with what we learn abroad, things we can learn from the outside world, in terms of transparency, even perhaps organization, better sort of logistics, organization, infrastructure, all of that, and see if we can bring the expertise that we are seeing and learning outside of Nigeria back to Nigeria.